we're hoping today will be another successful one for this society. And we are very delighted to offer these sessions to support the whole industry. Members and non-members are on the call today. And we're looking forward to sharing some expertise with you and our experiences, and hopefully help you in these difficult times in whichever industry you're in. We also hope that you will ask questions, and this is a very relaxed session, so feel free to unmute or use the chat button to ask questions. So joining us today, if we have some panel members, the session will be chaired by Ian Booth, who's our SOFHT Company Secretary, but he's also Global Vice President for Food Safety and Quality at Martin Brower. Also kindly joining us is Karen Goodburn, Director of the Chilled Foods Association. We have Alan Lacey, who is our SOFHT Membership Director, who's also here to talk to us about regulatory matters, primary authority, etc. We've got John Hesse, Managing Director at Hygiene Improvement Solutions, Hein Timmerman from Diversey, Fiona Sullivan, Head of Food Safety from William Morrison's, Paul Davidson, Quality Management Director from Tate & Lyle, Diane White, Technical Operations Director at NSF, and Richard Mosley, National Account and Technical Manager for Bayard Crop Science, and Ben Sartain, who's Regional Manager for Precision Pest Management Solutions. So all of these guys have volunteered, thank you, today to take questions and answer questions as best they can, but please do join the conversation. Feel free to ask and to make suggestions for future sessions as well. So to manage this morning, I'm going to hand over now to Ian Booth, who will chair. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Fiona. Good morning, everybody. So just to remind you that the session today is being recorded, so we can share it on YouTube for those that can't join. I think everybody's in. There are a few people that are waiting in the lobby. I think we've accepted those onto the call. I think we also have Paul Keogh from ISS helping when we talk around cleaning and disinfection as well, potentially social distancing. So as Fiona said, we've brought a number of people together. What I failed to do on the last call was ask if there are any particular subjects that people wanted to cover on this call. So if someone could remind me at the end to do so, let me just let someone in from the lobby. Just left. If you could just remind me at the end to do so, that would be great. What we've done is continued some of the main discussion areas from the last call and those that were coming through on chat. So if there are any other areas that people specifically wish to know about this week, if they've got a current issue, if you could either say now or put through chats, and then we can ask again at the end. So any other areas that we're going to need to cover apart from cleaning and disinfection, pest control, PPE and social distancing?
Hi Ian, it's Fiona. I wonder whether a discussion around face masks,
yes,
both for colleagues working in the industry and for general public, might be quite interesting.
Sure. So I was hoping to touch on that in PPE as a general discussion, Fiona. So we've got a few people that could probably offer some guidance, but as a general discussion of people's thoughts as well. So yeah, definitely. So face masks and face coverings or community masks or non-medical. Yeah. Okay. Any other areas anybody would like to discuss? Okay, right, let's go for it. So we've got about 15 minutes on each of the areas. Some may be a longer discussion than others. As we said, it's just for people to chip in, ask questions as we go along. So we were going to start with a cleaning and disinfection. Anybody have any particular questions they'd like to ask? I've got a few to get things started, but anybody has any particular areas they would like to question around cleaning and disinfection? Maybe I start, and then if something does come up, please do send it as a chat or just chip in. So what we've done, we think probably 3 times now, be the 3rd time that we've talked around cleaning and disinfection, and each time we've got different. I can see John. Hi, John Hesse here. You're being brave and showing your face, but I know you're going to help disinfection side. So hi. what we've done each time is bring different panelists on just to get their perspective, what they're seeing in the industry around this area. And the areas that we've talked about generally are how is cleaning and disinfection around an infection being handled, chemical availability, guidance on what to use, specific types of equipment. So maybe we could just make a start, and we have a question as well on survival on packaging. So we'll answer that in a minute. Just as far as cleaning and disinfection, John, you're on the screen, so that maybe puts you up first. Just from your perspective, I guess, what are the types of issues that you're being asked by clients around managing COVID-19? What are their sort of key questions they'll be asking you that may be useful for other people on the call?
I think they've been a bit nervous about which chemical to use. You know, what would be the most effective, when to use it, how to use it, correct concentrations.
And so on the last call, we were asking, is there an available list of chemicals? I think I gave the example of, in the US, the CDC will give a list of recommended, although I know they're not being tested specifically on coronavirus, but recommended viruses. I think we said on the last call there wasn't something that had been a list that had been proposed by the UK government. But
the British standard, the EN 14476, and you've got the kind of chemicals that are effective are stuff like peracetic acid, PAA that people know it as, bleach, sodium hypochlorite is effective as well, and alcohol above sort of 60-70% concentration is effective. But obviously you've got to be careful where you use that because it's flammable.
Yeah. Okay.
And usually a lot around sanitizers.
And as far as availability, so maybe bring in, I know we've got Hein joining us from Diversey. Hi, Hein.
Good morning.
Paul Keogh. Good morning. And we have Paul Keogh from ISS as well. Just as far as the availability of those chemicals, or Hein, just your views on what people are asking, the types of questions, concerns they have.
People are asking basically the same questions. What should we do now in cleaning and disinfection? But normally cleaning and disinfection is already well validated in most factories. We're focusing now not so much on different practices. So for all surfaces, we will still recommend foam cleaning. We will still recommend regular cleaning. We will focus a bit more on the amenities where people gather to take a look there at all surfaces, all exposed surfaces. But basically, the cleaning recommendation will remain, for open plant cleaning, for external cleaning, we can focus on the chlorinated foams and then followed by a good rinse and then by a recommended sanitizer disinfectant. And as John was saying, as long as the products have this official EN 14476 approval, we have a list of recommended sanitizers, and about availability, they all are. There was a bit of panic the first weeks in the provision of alcohols. So there was a bit of shortage or delay or 2 or 3 weeks in deliveries of alcohols. But that whole production has ramped up, seeing the focus in production line. So I think most of chemicals are available for cleaning, so that should not disrupt the process.
Thank you, Hein. One of the questions, or one of the comments last week, was that people are noticing that production lines are running for longer. So I just need to let somebody else in the lobby. The production lines are running for longer as people are trying to increase capacity. What impact does that have on cleaning within factories? For Hein or for John or for Paul. Paul, I know you're quite involved at ISS with cleaning of facilities. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's not so much the production line, it's the environmental cleaning, it's the additional areas and the additional touch points. Because clients are running production for longer, there are staff on site for longer, there are reduced cleaning windows in certain cases, but it's more around the environment and people moving around the extraneous areas of the factories, where we've increased cleaning of hand touch points, washrooms, changing rooms to a minimum of 2 hours. And like Haim said, we suffered in the early stages with some shortfalls. So our own internal list of approved chemicals grew, but has been modified based on availability. And we've put in different stages of cleaning. So, to increase the touch point of cleaning, there are a certain list of products. Where an area has been identified as having a suspected case, and then when there's a confirmed case, there are different elements and different products that we're using. The challenges I think that we're getting are that it's changing on a daily basis. Food manufacturing is a dynamic environment at the best of times. I think we're finding it to be more dynamic. Roller coaster was a good word that was used last week on one of our client calls. And it's the shortening of the time window, along with the resource challenges that we're facing. So if an element of a percentage of the workforce is either self-isolating or is away, it's difficult to then actually meet all of the shortened time windows with the necessary resource. Doesn't make it impossible, but it's a challenge I think everybody would probably recognise.
Thank you, Paul. And I can see some various chats going on. Larry, I know you. I can see your face. So hi there. I know you just sent quite a long chat. Rather than me reading it through, maybe you could just explain what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's too easy to get on a roll when you're writing these things. Essentially, it's very understandable that the focus at the moment is on food safety, hygiene, and for those of us who work in different areas outside production, so we're not in the field to pack house area or not in retail, but we work in the transport, food transport sector. The food transport sector, I'm sorry to say, has got an appalling record of food safety and hygiene. It's not enforced. None of the enforcement authorities look at it, and nothing has changed during this emergency. So we have a situation where, at a time when consumers need more protection than they've ever needed it, and food is more valuable than it's ever been, certainly in this world, not the third world, but here we have a level of hygiene and food safety which is accelerating food waste, food spoilage, and basically pathogenic contamination is a risk to consumers. I just wondered what people thought about the fact that there is no enforcement and that basically these poor standards exist as we speak out there.
Larry, just clarify, that's transportation of raw ingredients or finished product?
No. Funnily enough, raw ingredients, so we're now talking about things like bulk transport, so tankers, etc. They tend to be a lot better. There's an awful lot more control standards there. No, we're talking about ambient, frozen, chilled. We're talking about general food transport, fresh produce, but frozen, etc. So general food transport.
Anybody got any comments on that?
My understanding, where companies I've worked in before, they've usually had QAs inspecting deliveries, and it's pretty standard practice to inspect all deliveries for pest control, hygiene standards. So I'm used to it being transport being inspected all the time in the businesses I've worked with.
Well, that's you're talking about possibly the top 5% there. It's actually estimated that 80% of food transport shipments will be non-compliant with food safety and hygiene regulations. So we're talking about legal regulations. I'm not talking about third-party standards here. Third-party standards tend to be the equivalent of the Olympic high jump being 3 feet. So we're talking about legal requirements. There are good examples out there. I'm sure I don't need to be careful about who I mention here, but the Tesco, excellent example. Very, very good standards. And I won't mention people who haven't, that's unfair, but they tend to be a tip of an iceberg.
Hi, Larry. It's Fiona.
Hello, Fiona.
Kibbe. Thank you for that, because I work for Tesco, so that's
All right.
relief
Yeah,
on my part to hear that.
I recognise the name. Yeah.
Yes, but I was interested in, and I think I agree with you on the point around regulatory inspections.
Yeah.
Because in my experience as well, we do get inspectors into stores and into DCs and into factories, but
Yeah.
you're probably right, they don't spend a lot of time as part of that looking at the transport facilities or the trailers themselves.
Yeah.
I was just curious, do you think that's because they don't feel confident to do so? I mean, I know from my visits to DCs and things, the whole transport section is quite daunting. There's a lot of health and safety rules around how you look into trailers. You know, it's hard to walk around a yard, for example, and just look at trailers at random as part of an inspection. Do you think that might be the root cause? And
I think there's, yeah, I think that's a fair. It's a fair point. As we know, it's all very well to go out there and do a snap swab and look at the result and be satisfied, but that's not a microbial swab. We do the same. We'll get good results from a snap swab, and a microbial swab will show terrible results. The problem is that one will take a few minutes, the other one will take a good few days to get the results of. On the other hand, if you really want to find out what the standards are, you have to go through the microbiological analysis route. I'm sorry to mention Tesco again, but they are a good example. That's the route that they go down on a regular basis. Other people do the same, but not many. But we're talking about the majority here. You make a good point. I think it's almost seen as a black art, somewhere where nobody goes because it's just too complicated. It's been overtaken by third-party standards. So there's a waiving of third-party certification as a flag of convenience, but those third-party standards are well below the regulatory standards. So that's certainly an issue.
I wonder, sorry, Larry, to interrupt you. I was just wondering on that point about swabbing. I wondered if we could bring in Karen Goodburn on that. I'd be interested to hear her view on effectiveness of swabbing, because in terms of trailer cleanliness, it's probably not your first thought on how to check it. Are you there, Karen? Are you on mute?
Karen did join.
Am I okay to come in?
Yes, yeah, carry on.
Fiona. A company I worked with recently, I did a bit of consultancy work for them. They had their inspections on a PDA, and what they did, they photographed every delivery, which I thought was really good practice. So they photographed the hygiene standards as well. So it wasn't just a piece of paperwork where someone can just tick it. They actually took a photograph of every delivery coming in of the raw materials.
So given this is obviously an area we're discussing, and to be honest, it's what my role is as well. I'm in distribution, food distribution, so it is of interest. Maybe we could, for next week, we could maybe have a call for next week for those that are interested, and just offer some sort of key bullet points of guidance for those on the call of what to
Good
look
idea.
at, and we can then sort of give an overview of that on the next call. I'm mindful we've got a number of topics to go through. It's obviously
Absolutely.
one which I do agree that we should discuss. So if we have that as a topic for next week, so food transportation and distribution, then maybe offline using the SOFHT office, we can just connect a few people
Sure.
talking and then off about. Yeah, but thank you, Larry. Thanks for that.
No, thank you.
Karen, did you manage to?
Yeah,
you're on mute. Yep.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Fiona. Larry, I've read your post on LinkedIn about this, and well, I don't have direct experience of the transport sector, etc. in that way. Except we did start off when we wrote our first guidelines, covered manufacturer, distribution, and retail, and we had quite a hefty chunk on manufacturer. The retail was fairly scant, and there was about half a page, from what I remember, on the transportation. So it's a question of, I don't know what schemes are out there. Are we talking about another layer of auditing? God help us. But the main thing is basic hygiene. As for spot checks on swabs and things, there's always a question of where do you swab, and you can always choose where to swab, and is that going to really do anything? It's just really a question of culture and training.
Yes.
And certainly in your post, Larry, you're saying that people in the transport sector, and from your point of view, is seeing that food is packaged, so therefore it's protected, so you don't need to bother about anything, if I can just sum it up like that. And you keep challenging the FSA to take something on. But I think that there are transport organisations. I used to deal with Transfrigoroute. There's what used to be the Food Storage and Distribution Federation, and there should be Department for Transport and the FSA, and people ought to really get together if there's a real issue to be addressed outside of commercial operating standards like Tesco and others.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Okay, so let's put that for next week, and being in mind of COVID-19 handling during deliveries, I could probably share some sort of contactless delivery practices around that area, social distancing and transportation. So let's maybe we move on to our next topic.
Ian, could I just, it's Diane, could I just kind of add a point? For me, there are sort of two aspects of cleaning. One is the food safety element, which clearly we all as an industry operate and use our HACCPs, etc. And if we've got a good quality management system, we should be on top of all of that. It's kind of business as usual. The other element is the COVID protection. And I think they're quite distinct. So when I'm thinking about something like distribution, if the product is contained, yes, it's not right if it's not in a good, clean truck, etc. But I'm thinking about the implications of it being handled by the driver and then passed to the back of house and being handled from that perspective and packaging. So I think throughout that end-to-end risk assessment, you've almost got to do an extension of HACCP. I don't know what we call it, CASP or some other name for it, but of actually going through the whole process again and saying, what are the implications to everybody that's coming into contact with that food from a COVID point of view? And then what is the knock-on effect potentially on a food safety perspective?
I think that if I might just say, and I'll bow out then, but that's really perhaps that's where I should have started. From a COVID perspective, what we're looking at here is the food transportation sector is absolutely colossal on a global basis. And we've got a global market. The food is coming in from other countries. We're looking at millions, probably billions of pieces of equipment that carry food, millions of food handlers, millions of surfaces of trays, roll cages, shippers, pallets, call it what you will. The surfaces that could potentially be transfers, not food. I accept food is seen as a very low risk area, but to imagine that all those millions of people and millions of surfaces could not provide a risk factor is nonsense. But I suppose getting back to the point that I was making, if good hygiene practice, regulatory practice were followed, it wouldn't be a risk.
Okay, Larry, let's talk separately, because I've done quite a lot to Diane's point on how we're using HACCP guess we're calling it, of looking at social distancing through distribution, the whole process. And it sounds like we could come back to the group. So let's move on. But thank you for everybody's input on that. Much appreciated. Let's talk social distancing, if that's okay. So again, we've covered that on the last couple of meetings, and we were looking at social distancing practices within manufacturing, retail, food service. So we have a number of people joining us on our panel in this area. Maybe we could start with retail. And this time we have another Fiona, not Fiona Kibbe, but Fiona Sullivan, sorry, from Morrison's. I know Fiona on the last call from Tesco's gave a sort of overview of some of the practice they're completing in retail. But Fiona, do you mind just giving an example of some of the areas you're both completing, but also those that you're seeing maybe moving forward or new considerations and best practices?
Absolutely. So good morning, everyone. I work for Morrison's, and as you have probably seen, just doing your own shopping or in the news, social distancing has been quite a challenge, I think, both for ourselves and for other supermarkets. I mean, in terms of the outside of our stores, as you queue up to get in, I think people have become aware that actually the 2 metre rule is an important thing, and generally they're self-policing, and that seems to be working quite well. I think where we get our challenges, and I don't know if Fiona would agree or not, that it's inside the store. So people are keen to be inside, and once they're inside, they seem to forget that the 2 metre rule exists. And it's very, very challenging in terms of trying to make sure that our customers maintain that distance. That's not to say that in some places, you know, people are doing it, but actually it's not happening consistently. And we have seen some elements of aggression from customers where we have tried to put that guidance in place. So I think, yes, very, very much a challenge in terms of social distancing. I think going forward, well, I guess it'll depend on how we come out of this and self-isolation and you know, the new world. I don't think we will manage a 2 metre social distancing, but I do think we might maintain elements of distancing in terms of checkouts, as an example, where we've already put in our stores the panelling between the customer and the colleague. I'm not really sure why we would want to take that down, apart from to replace it maybe with something better. But yes, I think it'll depend on the way that the media goes to some extent on this as well, and the way that our competitors go.
Thank you, Fiona. Any other comments around retail from anybody? If not,
I'd be, just as I'm on the call, I'd be really intrigued if anybody's been out there and seen it done in an absolutely fantastic way. You know, that would be useful for me.
Fiona, it's Paul Keogh again. From a personal perspective, the one thing that I've noticed is that certainly my local supermarkets have increased these self-serve checkouts, including the long line ones, so not just the small scanners, but the long line ones for larger trolleys. The thing that I've noticed, though, is that they struggle to have enough staff there to then actually help when there are issues. I'm terrible at scanning. I can never find a barcode personally. So it's having the people, and the way those systems are set up doesn't promote the social distancing, because the staff member then does have to come to exactly where you're standing. So maybe there's an education piece there that we should stand back. Maybe it's floor markings, you know, when the staff colleague comes to help you. But those things, I think, are going to come in more and more. But I hope that it means that there will be the availability of more staff to actually assist when there are problems.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Paul. In fact, I was just looking at something this morning, which is about having maybe social distancing champions in our store. So people who will coach others to maybe not become confrontational, because that's definitely not what we want, but coaching our colleagues to coach our customers that social distancing is a desirable thing. And I think it can be a challenge on the checkouts. as you say, particularly in the self-service area. I know that we've tried to limit the amount of self-service tills that are open at any one time, so we're trying to naturally ensure that people have got some distance. But in terms of that colleague piece, you're entirely right, customers do need help at times. What we have tried to do is to provide PPE, so whether that's visors, face masks, gloves, and we're not actively encouraging the use actually, because that's not what the guidance is from the government. But we are offering it to colleagues who feel that they are getting close to customers and they do feel they want some measure of protection. So that is out there for our colleagues should they want to use it.
Good.
Hi, Laura Brown here.
Hello, Laura.
Hi, I just wanted to share sort of a personal sort of insight from shopping actually at my local Morrison's yesterday, and Fiona was asking if anybody had done it really well, and I would actually say from when this first started, I was really impressed with the lengths that my local supermarket went to. 3 weeks on, or my third sort of weekly shop, and yesterday it appeared inside the shop that everybody had completely forgotten what was going on. Staff were not giving social distancing. Many customers were ambling around as if it was a normal day. And actually, I think the worst offenders were probably customers that were going in with their own personal protective equipment, who then I think felt they could just do whatever they wanted. So I just would be interested to know how either Fiona thinks that this is going to how are customers going to be made to continue working in this in a sensible way, because it seems that just 1 week on from my last shop, it just seemed like everybody had forgotten about it.
Laura, are you willing to give me the store's name?
Yeah, do you want it now?
Please, you might as well.
Yeah, St Albans.
Okay, thank you. I do think it's a challenge. I don't think it's going to be easy, and I don't think it's easy now. So I definitely don't think it's going to be easier in the future. I think people do struggle with the 2 meters, and certainly in stores, they are so keen on getting the product that they want. And this isn't all customers, I'm trying not to generalise, but certainly I've seen some customers who are quite happy to stand next to another customer who is uncomfortable at that process. You know, that they don't want the other customer next to them, but it's quite hard to confront somebody. And so I'm definitely not saying this is easy. It's not easy now for us, and it won't be easy in the future when we're thinking less about these types of things potentially.
Ian, it's Alan. One of the things that I understand went out from the HSE in the last couple of days that was available to local authorities was some quite confusing advice that said that a 1 meter distancing was sufficient according to the WHO. And the whole piece was very contradictory. But, you know, to start quoting 1 meter now when people are trying to gear up to 2 meters, I find is amazing. And I'll look at that a bit more so that when if we do discuss this again in more detail, I have some more information. It only came to my notice early this morning. But one of the things that I find quite interesting about this, and I'm sure Fiona will agree, and some of the feedback I've got from most retailers is the input from local authorities and attempts to enforce what is guidance. And obviously it's a bit difficult to get primary authority advice when we're all sort of thinking on our feet in a fast changing environment. But I understand that a lot of the questions directed from local authorities are not just about social distancing, they're about availability and special needs people, and most of that is coming from politicians rather than the enforcers themselves. And would you agree with that, Fiona?
I don't 100% agree with that, Alan. I mean, we've had some contact from both environmental health and from police forces, you know, via complaints by customers or just because they're in the local area. and actually, once we've taken them through the process and how it's working, how we've calculated the number of people that can be in a store at any one time, generally they're quite happy with that. We have had a couple of occasions where they've wanted us to take additional measures, and we've taken those measures. But again, it's very much like environmental health generally, really. It seems to depend on the officer and on the council as to what they require.
Exactly. I know that makes life very difficult, doesn't it, for you as a multi-site company? And, you know, why should you adopt a local standard on the whim of an individual when you're generally, you know, doing your best to deal with the situation across your estate? One thing I will say, I think one of the problems that we will have is, like everything, the longer a situation goes on, the general public tend to be more complacent about it. And I think that if this goes on for much longer, the whole concept of social distancing will be a tough one to enforce. But on PPE, just as an aside, I was in a fairly large independent pharmacy last week. The guys on the dispensary were wearing masks. Some of the other colleagues in the store were wearing no PPE at all, but there was one individual who not only had latex gloves on, he had a waterproof fluorescent cagoule, a face mask, and a hard hat with a visor. And he was using that for shelf filling, and people were looking at him thinking, you know, what the hell is going on here? So, yeah, just as an aside, that one.
It has been quite interesting, Alan, because we've obviously offered the face visors, the masks, the gloves, but actually at this moment in time, the take up of those has been incredibly low.
Sure. Yeah.
It's Karen here. The interesting thing you said, Fiona, about people coming in. I think it was you, Fiona, who said this about people coming into the store and they seem the worst abusers. No, it was Laura Brown saying the worst abusers, offenders, seem to be customers with their own PPE. This is one of the main arguments about giving people but it's all politics versus science, isn't it? Just waiting for the politicians to win over the scientists at the moment, it seems to be. But the science is clear that nothing apart from an FFP3 is going to do anything against viruses, but they should all be going to the front line, NHS. Anything else that you do is not even cosmetic. If somebody goes home and makes their own face mask out of God knows what and sticks it on the face, it'll just be a build-up of nasty, just general gunge, and then you're asking somebody to wash it and reuse it. It's just a nonsense, and it gives this feeling of invincibility, and people start to misbehave in terms of hand hygiene, general distancing, basic hygiene. They think it just solves the whole thing, when it's actually gone and made it worse because they're just building up contamination generally. We can't, in the chilled sector, we really have the problem with, it would also end up with lots of condensation, and within 10, 15 minutes you end up with a soggy rag on your face, which then has to be dealt with. So the whole thing is just, I think it's trying to make the politicians have this in reserve so they can make people in the street feel they can do something, even though it's actually the wrong thing. Yeah. So got a really strong position on this one about face masks generally in the general public, because we can see what happens. And certainly with Virginia Murray, who's on the PHE COVID team, just the other day, she was commenting that if you walk around London, as I haven't done for some time now, people just have them on their chins. They don't cover their nose or mouth, and it's just a nonsense, the whole thing. And they just are very laissez-faire about the basics. And really, I've seen comments also that because there's been more emphasis on hand hygiene, the flu rate has gone down. And it just shows how filthy people are generally, doesn't it? It's human nature we're talking about. Human nature and psychology, and that's what's driving a lot of this. Also, while I've got the air, Virginia Murray also was astonished to be asked about the provision of visors in the food sector. Now, PHE, these people on the COVID team, have been really strong about the value of standard high care, high risk production area practices, which are actually designed to control microbial contamination and spreads. That's why we do it. And they're saying, no, carry on doing what you're doing. You don't have to do anything else. You got the soap, you got all the bits. You're screening out the people with symptoms as they come to work, which is a big one, to not have somebody coughing and spluttering all over the place and spreading stuff. So all of this is in place already, and you just have to carry on doing it. And giving a visor to somebody means they can't move very well. It doesn't stop anything occurring. And then you've got to manage the damn thing. It's got to be fitted to people individually. So there's all these different things. And I've got sites in the membership who said to me, even within one group, that what people seem to be demanding in a high care, high risk environment is really, they're driven by the unions, or what's some sort of vibe going around the site. Some just want to be asked, are you well? What are your symptoms? Have you got any symptoms and all this as you come in, and everybody's screened, and then take comfort in knowing that all their colleagues haven't got symptoms. Yes, I know about asymptomatics, so let's not go there. But or others say, I want a mask, even though it's useless. Or others want a visor, even though it doesn't really do much either. So it's all about comfort, and without understanding that what we have already in high care, high risk is based on operating theatres. And I think there's a massive PR job that needs to be done internally on this one. Really massive PR job to make people understand who are in the workforce, on the factory floors, that this is done to protect you and the environment and the food. It's just standard stuff. And I think that's what's been missing all the way along, and we're fighting a bit of a rear guard action all the time. I feel better for saying that now. I don't know about you.
Very, very enlightening. Thank you. Any further comments from anybody relating to that?
I just totally agree with Karen that, as an industry, we've got great practices in terms of end-to-end ensuring that food is safe. For me, it's more about how we make sure that the individuals aren't getting ill, so that your workforce goes down, and therefore individuals are under pressure to try and do the job with less people, and that's when the errors start to occur. But I absolutely agree with her that, that's what our industry is great at. It kind of reminds me of all the arguments about whether to wear gloves or not. Masks are even worse than that debate.
Thank you, Dan. Maybe we could bring in Paul Davidson. So I know Paul within manufacturing at Tate & Lyle. I know also on the council at SOFHT. So just maybe your thoughts around management within manufacturing environment.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So good morning, everybody. So we broke it down into really 3 zones of how do people get into work. So we need to look at how they get into work, because a lot of them come by their own vehicles, but some use public transport. So then how do they then from arrival get to their workspace, and then the workspace itself? So if I start with getting to work, I mean, the first thing that everyone's done is reduce the volume of people on site. So if you don't need to be on site, then work from home. So that presents a slightly different challenge, which I'll come on to later. But just reducing the amount of people, non-essential visitors, that's the first place to start. We've even looked at people, if they're coming in on rush hour, can we adjust shifts so that they can come into work when maybe public transport's a little lighter? So that there is an element of flexibility that some businesses can, on a case-by-case basis, look at. That's one place to start. Getting the people to the workspace, so we'll skip the bit about any checks at the arrival, because I think that's a separate subject. I think you'll find that corridors vary from place to place, so there are big pinch points. So trying to get people to their workspace, you can put signage on the floor saying 2 meters, but you've got to control that traffic. So coming up with one-way systems, that's a good thing to look at. So can you flow people in one way and out another way? It's not always practically possible. We looked at things like turnstiles. People don't want to use turnstiles and be touching them. So we've looked at opening up fire exits and having them policed by security, because it's easier for people to walk in without touching anything, scan in, go for their normal arrival checks and donning PPE where required, and then go to their workspace. So that's another area we've looked at. The workspace itself, I think that varies across the industry, but we looked at things like palletization. If it's manual palletization, quite often people get within less than 2 meters. We've had to look at, our portfolio to say, should we be producing all these products? And if so, what PPE should we be using? So I agree with some of the other comments about, only use PPE where absolutely, the FFP3 mask should not be worn unless absolutely essential. So we do provide masks, surgical masks. We are wearing those, but you have to observe social distancing. The people become a lot bolder when wearing these masks. So again, I agree. I think it was Alan's comment that, as the passage of time goes on and people are wearing masks, that's where the risk can increase. So I think there is a responsibility to everyone to police this. And I think my final point I want to make, which goes back to the hearts and minds question, is we're asking people to come into work. We're also asking other people to work from home. So the people that are coming into work, we've got a responsibility for their safety. So we need to listen to them. So I would encourage everybody to set up daily contacts with the staff for whatever forum, for unions or through having email or telephone forums, because they're going to come in with concerns, and the rules are changing on a daily and weekly basis from government. So, and they've been asked to do more and more on a daily basis. So we need to listen to their concerns. And I think we do have to take the extra step. It may not be government advice, but staff are asking for things that protect them. We should listen to them. And if it's a small thing, we should do it, just that they feel more comfortable coming into work. And, and that's the more controlling the hearts and minds aspect. So that's probably all I have to add to that, Ian.
Thank you, Paul. And I think that point around well-being, I know Paul, Keir and I were talking a couple of days ago before this call around social distancing and people's well-being coming into work. So I think we've looked and talked on these calls, and I guess within our own businesses, around the physical requirements of social distancing. We're now talking about the mental requirements of well-being. So maybe we can cover that in a bit more detail on our next call. So thank you. I'm very mindful we've got 10 minutes left. We've got pest control questions, and we have a look at food service for social distancing. So we've got quite a lot we're trying to cover, but thank you, Paul, much appreciated. And maybe we could then move on to Diane. I know that from a food service perspective, maybe might have to be a little bit brief, but what are the things that you would say are starting to be considered going forward as maybe the lockdown is eased and some of the controls that would be required within a restaurant environment or food service?
I think firstly to say that food service was the first to go, and it's been quoted as being the last to come back. So that is making planning and critical paths extremely challenging. You need a crystal ball to kind of work out how you're going to be able to get the products into the sites and how you're going to get the staff back to work and get all of those sites cleaned and back into a state that they're ready to operate. So for me, that is the biggest challenge, is actually working out when and how you're going to do that. The big advantage is that we can take the learnings from the other industries that are still running, like retail, and also what's happening in different countries as people start to return. So that's really helpful. I think the biggest risk to us all at the moment, certainly in food service, will be social media, and all you need is one member of staff to wipe their nose and touch the plate, and your reputation and your brand can be majorly at risk. So with all those staff being currently furloughed, getting them all trained back up and ready to sort of operate at a new absolutely the right level they always were operating at, but an enhanced level, and then starting to look at all those processes that are currently being applied in retail from a customer perspective. Totally agree what everyone said about how are customers going to behave. Are they going to go crazy as soon as they're released and start trying to get into all the restaurants, or is it going to be a sort of slow trickle feed? So tables will be spread out. There'll be potentially marking on the floors. There'll be queues, booking online. Anything you can do that's non-touch that can be done online has got to be the way forward, so that you know how many covers you're going to have, so you can plan to space people out appropriately. Potentially pre-questionnaires, has anybody are you all coming as a family group? Has anybody suffered? I've seen stuff from China where they're reopening, where they're actually, putting the temperature probe on people's foreheads before they come into the restaurant. How do you give people a sense that it is going to be safe to eat in your environment? And the better reputation and the better image you can have will give people the confidence to come back. And then it appears to me it's about keeping simplicity throughout the process. You know, within the kitchen itself, how do you make sure that the staff can move around safely? So how do you make sure that it's a simple menu that doesn't mean there's lots of people and lots of complexity going on in there? So keeping the launch simple. And I mean, I could talk for Britain on this, I'm conscious we haven't got time, but you know, stuff like the toilets, you know, the toilets are going to be so important. How do you make sure that people don't leave your restaurant, then get ill and then blame your brand on giving them COVID, or indeed giving your staff it? So how do you make sure that handles, you know, all those touch points that we've talked about within manufacturing, how do we make sure that there's an additional level of cleaning? You know, the old piece of paper on the back of the door that says when someone last cleaned the facility, you know, that's you know, that's got to be torn up, because it's more about that regular cleaning, the flush handles, all of those elements to make sure that the customers feel and the staff feel that they're being dealt with safely. Do you give them menus, or do you give them paper menus, and how do you still cover off all the interaction that needs to happen between the staff and the customer in terms of asking them about allergens, etc., and keeping those practices going? So there's lots and lots that's being done, and the approach for me is, I keep going on about HACCP, is a full end-to-end risk assessment at each point in the process, be it working with your suppliers or working with your distributors, back of house and front of house. How do you make sure that each point in that chain is not creating any risk?
Thank you, Diane. I think there is a fair amount in this area, and I think your point around the first to lock down, the first and the last to come back, but it's starting to show some green shoots within food service, and I think your point about starting to prepare, train, maybe we can, if we talk next week on social distance, we can spend a little bit more time on food service and restaurant environments and well-being, as we've talked about earlier, generally, to just give a little bit more time around the subject. So I know there are a number of people on the call around that food service takeaway delivery area. So thank you, much appreciated. Again, we are quite limited on time, but we have a number of subjects. We will try and concentrate on a couple of subjects next week. But we had kindly had a number of panelists around pest control and management, and it'd be nice to have an opportunity to talk to these people on the call. Does anybody have any specific areas around pest control that they would like to ask, or any questions? Otherwise, I can open up with some. Okay, fine. Well, what we talked about last time was issues within a mothballed factory, and also around pest controllers as key workers. So that's moved on, I believe, from when we first discussed this. So we have Richard, Ben, sorry, I've got to remind myself, I've got lots of people on the screen now, that were talking around pest control management. But just from both your views, can you just give an update of how pest control is currently being managed, how you see things maybe have progressed? So maybe Richard or Ben. Ben, would you like to go? Ben, I can see you on the screen, so maybe you could give your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing from my point of view, and I think most pest controllers' point of view, is that pest control doesn't stop in this period, and it really needs to carry on. We have now been given key worker status. Carry on doing our work. Some facilities are working as normal, some are not, some are busier than normal because of the changes in the food industry. But the threat is ever present from pests, and it's not going to go away because of this. So it really has to be business as usual, if not business as usual plus, because areas where there are less staff generally are more likely to get infested, or an infestation is likely to go unnoticed for longer than it would normally do, because there's less people there. If cleaning and general maintenance may be diminished if there's less staff on site. Raw materials may be being stored for longer, so a lot of the kind of risk factors are actually increased. Pest control needs to carry on.
Thank you, Ben. Richard, so I know we're running out of time. Maybe we can cover some more in next detail next week. But anything from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, just to support Ben's comments, I mean, the two sides of the coin where we are at this moment in time is that we've got sites that have limited access that are being shut down that can cause pest issues, but we also have sites that are increasing production and producing more and more. And that also causes an issue as professional pest controllers, because that limits our access to those sites. So it's kind of a perfect storm where we're struggling in a number of areas to get access for either shutdown reasons or high production reasons. So it's incredibly important that the lines of communication between professional pest controller and the food site remain open, and the communication is kept moving, because we are moving into a key time of year for a number of pest species. And the other thing to remember is that if we have got an increase in production, then we've got an increase in the movement of goods. And wherever you move goods, you've got to move pest. So not just the production sites, but also the sites in between, the warehousing and storage, where the intermediate storage where equipment or product is being stored, and then the movement then onto the various food sites, supermarkets, those kind of things where the products are being distributed. Then there's always that potential to move more pest activity, simply because we've got more goods that are moving through the chain. So being aware of the situation, and Ben's quite right, pests don't stop, and where they get an opportunity to actually use the rodent or insect abilities to create a harbourage and an infestation problem, then you have to be very aware that can happen very, very quickly, especially in the warmer conditions, because they're encouraging more pest activity. From a manufacturer point of view, then what I would suggest to the professional pest control industry and to the food industry is that when it comes to actual treatment of pest activity, then product selection becomes important. And understanding the way that formulations work and how best they work and the longevity of the formulation can be really important, especially if access for treatment of pest activity is limited. And, residual lives of 12 weeks on insecticides or 12 months on bait formulations can be really important at this moment in time, because we've got limited access into a number of locations. So that longevity of treatment can be very important if the pest control themselves doesn't necessarily know when they're going to get the next opportunity to visit or get complete access to the site because of the movement of goods or simply how busy that site is at the particular moment in time.
Thank you, Richard. Apologies, I've had to rush through. As I said, quite a lot we've covered this week, but much appreciated. I would say pest control continues to be something that will be discussed following calls. I'm mindful of the time. I need to give Fiona a chance as chair just to close off. What I'm suggesting for next week, we talk around social distancing, specifically around food service and restaurants as they look to hopefully start and learn from what we have in retail. Talk around social distancing and the well-being of staff. That's sort of next step for staff, so how they feel confident in where they're working. Food transportation and delivery. Maybe, Alan, if there is any updates on local authority guidance or HSC, that'd be grateful if you give an update there. If any other questions people have that they want to talk around, maybe can be channeled through the SOFHT office prior to next week. Fiona, I'm going to have to hand over to you now.
Yeah, sorry, we're very short of time. If we've got maybe a little bit more of Karen's time before we close, there was a question right at the very beginning around survival on packaging. And I just wondered whether in a short update, whether Karen Goodburn or any of the other panelists want to comment on that, because I know from my experience it's quite hard to advise people, general public, on that matter.
Okay, hold on.
There's a little bit of background noise. I don't know if everybody else could go back on mute for a minute while Karen very quickly tries to answer my hard question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, right. I was on a CBI webinar yesterday. I lose track of the days at the moment. And John Simpson, who's the chair of the PHE COVID response team, was asked just the same question. It keeps on going round and round. I don't know why the answers don't really land, but so the original guidance on survival of viruses, they've sort of said 72 hours is the top range. Things are known about coronaviruses, and there was a paper that wasn't peer-reviewed that went out, and it caused a lot of this interest. But 72 hours was the original guideline, but they reckon that 48 hours is probably adequate on hard surfaces and less on soft surfaces. So the 72-hour assumption is very safe. And comparatively speaking, coronavirus survival is quite short, 24 hours on cardboard, but PHE will stick to 72 hours guideline for the time being. However, the assumption is that somebody who is symptomatic has coughed on it, they have to get the virus out of the person, and there can be some aerosol from breathing, but really, compared with something quite physical happening and expelling something from the body onto packaging, the risks are really not seen by PHE or WHO as being anything significant. The primary control is fitness to work, don't have people coughing and sneezing all over the place in contact with food or packaged foods.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And at the end of the day, this is a virus which is mostly spread person to person.
Mm-hmm.
So and things like packaging, as you said, are low risk. Is that right?
They are, but there's no excuse for basic hygiene not being complied. We heard from Larry, was it?
Yeah, so thank you. Thanks for that. And we're very slightly running over time, so I'll just quickly close up just by saying thank you to everybody who has attended today, both to listen in, to ask questions, and to those who've tried to answer and shared their expertise and experience really clearly. I think we always run out of time, and there's always more questions than we have time to answer. So we will carry over, as Ian said, some of the topics today into next week's session. So we'll continue these every Wednesday. So please do watch out for the email from the SOFHT office advising on the joining details for the next one. And everybody, please do stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you.